Devjani, you've had a wonderful career, and I'm so glad to have you on this series because I think what you have done within Intel is really aspirational. A lot of youngsters would aspire to be where you are. If you were to look back on your journey, what are the 2-3 milestones or turning points that got you here?
I think the decision to join Intel was one of the biggest turning points of my life. I was just out of MBA school, SP Jain in fact, and trying to figure out where I want to go in life. I had done a small stint at an ad agency, and it was at that point in career where I had quite a few choices, and most of them were so-called the blue chip companies in India. And then came Intel, which I frankly hadn't even heard of at that. This was way back in early 90s, and I had totally not heard of Intel and what they do. Read up a little about it, went in for the interview, and I just loved what I saw. First, that was the first time I was being interviewed by a woman who was heading marketing in APJ, an amazing woman who stays a mentor to date. And I think it was that time when that bulb sort of switched on and I realized that I can be ambitious and I can go places in this industry. I don't have to settle for, just a marketing job or a PR job, but I can really aim for more. And I said, if this company can allow her to go where she is, this is where I want to be. It was a completely one of those gut instincts and the decisions you take from the heart and not the head. And I think that was a huge turning point because I'm now going to complete 20 years with Intel. The amount of learning I have got in this company, I would have never got anywhere else. The freedom to change fields, the freedom to take on completely new assignments wherever in the world you want to. And just learn on the job and get that satisfaction of building something. The best part of Intel that I love is it allows you to be a business professional and it allows you to be an entrepreneur. So it gives you a bit of that both, which many companies don't. So I think that was one of the biggest turning points.
You've also had a very interesting geographical mix in terms of your career. Normally you would think that you need a Ivy League MBA or something to get into the international scene, but you've been able to do it. So how did you do it, and what are the learnings from the kind of experiences that you've had?
Most of my learning has come from the job, to be very honest. I mean, I had SP was a great institute, etc., but when I joined, my mentors, and I've had an excellent bunch of mentors at Intel, I still do, because the learning still continues, it never stops. But in my early years, the first 5 years of Intel, they encouraged me to take as many risks as I wanted to, because they said, you have nothing to lose, really nothing to lose. You're starting right at the bottom, right? Take the risks, go out and do things find things that are completely out of your comfort zone, that you believe you cannot do. And then see if you can do those. So that's when, if you see my career at Intel, it's a zigzag. The first 5 years, I switched jobs pretty much every year. I just went from one role to another role and completely different skill sets, completely different capabilities required. The amount of learning you get from going through that journey is what builds the base. The network you build as you go through that journey, different business groups, different units, stays with you for your entire life. And that is the network that sort of helps you navigate up in the organization. The one thing I realized is the kind of degree you have stays outside the door once you're in the company. It never comes up even in conversations, right? It's all about what have you delivered? What are your capabilities that you're bringing to the table? What is the value you're bringing to the company and to your customer, right? Everything starts, all decisions are taken based on that, not where had you studied and what have you studied. So that was another big learning for me.
When you say that you had to move out of your comfort zone and you really took risks, give us one or two examples of what it meant to you as personal learnings, in terms of how did you move out of your comfort zone and what were the learnings like?
So I had done, I had studied marketing all my life. I was, right after SP, I joined an ad agency. So I thought that was what my career was supposed to be. I was in marketing. I joined Intel in marketing. I joined as a marketing exec. And in fact, when I joined Intel, there were just 5 people in Intel India. So we were we were doing everything possible. And I did have a goal. In fact, I sort of stated it even when they interviewed me at Intel, was at some point, they always ask you, what do you want to do 20 years, etc. So I said, listen, if I'm going to be with you 20 years, then I better be running this company, at least in India. I have to come back to India as the head. Otherwise, I'm not going to stay with you for 20 years. I honestly hadn't taken it that seriously when I said it. It's one of those things you say in interviews. But my mentors did take it very seriously. And they never let me forget it. So every mentor discussion I would have, or every development discussion I would have, they would start off with, you do want to get back to India and head the business, right? So this is not going to be enough. So the first stepping out of the comfort zone was moving from marketing to sales, right? That was a big, for those who are not, especially our business, where what you're selling changes pretty much on a daily basis. It's a very dynamic selling environment. And keep in mind, we don't sell products to end customers. We have to create the demand for our products without selling it, and then work via our ecosystem. We are an ingredient brand. So selling at Intel takes on a completely new high as far as selling challenges go. So first step was that, moving from marketing to hardcore sales. Then within sales, the different kind of ecosystems that we sell to, the different kind of products. So I moved a lot from ecosystem to ecosystem, because we have different selling, and how you sell to a housewife is very different from how you sell to a business, how you sell to a partner, etc. Then came the challenge of get out of India now. This is, this market well. Time for you to pack your bags, move to a geo where you have absolutely no experience. Fine, let's do that. So loved it. I spent 8 years in Southeast Asia. I went to Southeast Asia because marketing was still a forte, so they said, go to Southeast Asia as head of marketing for that region. Went there. Within 1 year, an opportunity came up to head a country sales, Malaysia. Put my hand up. I had nothing to lose, as they say. For 1 year, I did that. Then within a year, they promoted me to head the entire region, all of sales and marketing. 8 dynamic countries, 8 fast-growing countries. I mean, those 6 years I spent doing that was just absolutely amazing.
You must have been very, very good at your job to get it in that context. So I'm going to ask you, how did you train yourself? What was the skilling required? Because you were actually learning as you go along. So what was the learning experience like at that point?
So the other thing, Minnie, is I'm not a technical person. I don't have a technical degree. I'm not an engineer. And here I was in a company where 99% of the employee population are engineers. So the first thing, my first few months, I was trying to figure out, how do I become an engineer on the job? How do I get to? And I remember one of Sean Maloney. You might have heard of him. He used to head APJ, all of APAC at that point in time. And one of my early career conversations was with him, where I sat down and said, Sean, I can't become an engineer. Does this mean I don't have a future at Intel? Because I can tell consumers what our products will do for them, but I can't tell consumers how our products are built. I don't know the nuts and bolts of how a CPU is made and all of that. And he said, that's your strength. Okay, we have enough engineers. We don't have people who understand the consumer language and the consumer's mind. That's your biggest strength. So don't try to acquire something that is not you, or where you're not going to be the best. Find areas and opportunities where you can be the best version of yourself, and build those as your sort of strength basis, right? And I followed that advice to the T. So if you are in sales and marketing, the first thing and the most important asset you bring to the table is the consumer knowledge. Knowing what your consumers want, knowing what your consumers will want tomorrow more than what they want today, being able to translate that back into a language that our engineers will understand, and That's what allows us to stay ahead and building that connect with the consumers, right? So I've always focused on that rather than trying to compete and figure out how to become an engineer. I gave that up after 6 months, and I said, I'm just going to focus on what I'm good at. And I think that, understanding where you will never be good at everything. So understanding where you can bring the maximum value to the company and the maximum value back to your customer is extremely, extremely important.
You often learn from mistakes also, and I'm sure you've had your share of learning from mistakes. Give us one incident or one example of where there was a setback and you learned from it, and what were the lessons learned?
It's you learn every day. I think when I came into India, right, around 3 years back, we've always, and not when I say we, I don't mean Intel. I think most companies, especially the MNCs, look at India as one market, where you most have your resources in Delhi, Bombay, and you run national programs, and everything will roll out beautifully. You'll get scale. And that's what we did initially, because that's how we thought India worked. And I think that was one of the biggest failures, because India is not one market. India is a lot of different markets, a lot of different countries, if I look at it that way, with governments, cultures, ethics, policies, etc. And I think it took me around 6 months to realize that I knew this was not working. You go through everything looking at organization capabilities, program efficiencies, but then after 6 months, I was 100% sure the model is broken, right? And that's when we had to completely bring about a change in the way we are structured, organized, everything, to start thinking of India as so many different markets, which means you need to have many country managers all over, etc. You need a completely different structure. Instead of one national program, you need to have multiple programs to catering to those local cultures. The one thing I've realized is, as long as I'm putting in my best effort and it's for the right reason, I will not get fired for failing. Not at Intel. I'll definitely not get fired for failing. If anything, it helps. They know that I'm the kind of person who'll take risks and who'll try out new things, right? It's always a 50% chance of failing, no matter how good you are. So at some point, that fear of failing and that fear of saying, if I fail, the world ends, has to put on the back burner. And you have to realize that with failure comes lots of learnings. Like this example I gave you, it actually helped us tremendously in being more efficient in India.
Sure. On the flip side, what's your proudest moment? Coming and becoming the India country head or taking care of a big vertical for Intel here in India?
I think tons of the Intel career has tons of proud moments. So becoming the country head of India is great, but no, I'll feel really proud when I do something with it and I show the results of what we can deliver. So I would say my proudest moment to date is the way we turned around the last year I was in charge of Southeast Asia. From a seemingly unknown geo to being one of the fastest growing geos in APAC and in Intel. And I hope someday with India we'll be able to beat that.
Wonderful. Tell me something. The industry is rapidly evolving. Debjani, we've seen what technology has done on the mobile and mobility space. Intel has been a game changer in the processor space. How do you see the industry moving and changing with the rapidity it is? And what's the role Intel is going to play in this new smartphone era?
It's not the smartphone era. It's the consumer era. The device, the form factor, shape and size will change very soon. Today is smartphone, tomorrow it'll be something else. What is not going to go away is that it's a consumer era. Today consumers are dictating terms. What they want to use, how they want to use it, where they want to use it, what they want to do with it, which brands they want to buy, etc. And companies are trying their best to keep up with the changes. I think what you will find is that the leaders that emerge, the long-term, the sustainable leaders that emerge, are the ones who figure out how to stay a step ahead. right? Which means you have to read people's mind, which means you have to create a future, not build that future, but actually create a future which people will aspire to, because that's the only way you can do it. And which means you'll have to innovate like crazy. And your innovation has to be completely disruptive. And that's a fun challenge to have in front of you, especially for a company like Intel, which has been built on innovation. So that's how we are seeing it. It's not about any device. It's really the consumer era. What this means is, to stay in the lead, we have to create the market, and we have to start thinking of things that are not obvious today, that the consumers are not seeing today but will want tomorrow. I think one of the areas where I think that there are two key areas of focus for us, right? One is innovation to make the technology way more intuitive. From no passwords, no wires, to just perceptual computing, where the computer can someday maybe read your mind and know what you want. And when I say computer, it can look like anything. It can be a smartphone, a phablet, or your watch, or whatever, your refrigerator, everything will compute. So the whole endeavor to make computing as basic and as intuitive, I think we haven't even scratched the surface of the iceberg on that one. There's tremendous amount of innovation required, and I think that's a huge focus for the future growth. The second area really is the data. And not so much the data, but the analytics, how you mine that data, what do you do with that data? Because as I said, to stay ahead of the consumer, you really have to know them, right? And I think this is pretty much going to define competitive advantage. Which company uses analytics better than others is what's going to determine who's going to lead, right? Who's going to have that last mile connect with the consumers, because everyone will be dying to get a share of that. So disruptive innovation, and then analytics to stay in touch with the consumer, to predict consumer behavior.
You've got your ear to the ground in this sense. So what are the trends that you're noticing which people should be cognizant of? Or because what's happened is technology, and what technology can do has changed lives.
Yeah.
And the big question is what the world is going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because really a lot is changing in that. So what are the one or two trends that you are noticing out there?
The move towards a predictive and intuitive technology, be it in healthcare, be it in education, be it in just your everyday work life, etc. Technology is going to become something that you will not even know it exists, but it's going to be there, and it's going to be doing your work for you and working or whatever you want it to do for you, right? I think the move towards predictive technology is going to become pretty big. And today it's manifesting itself maybe in the form of the healthcare bands and smartwatches, etc., that we have, that is telling us how much we sleep and how many calories are we burning. But it's going to do a lot more. It's going to be telling us what's happening inside our body. It's going to be telling us when those cancer cells are growing, when do we need to go in for those checkups. So huge opportunity. I mean, it's just this is one of those places where I have absolutely no hesitancy in saying we are limited by our own creativity and thinking here as to where this can go, right? And I think that's the area that excites me the most, because
Sure.
there's so much you can do.
And what about data analytics, Deepjani? Because I know every company is looking at data analytics. Many of them have not figured out what it can do for them.
Yeah.
But the smart ones, especially consumer-facing ones, are rapidly adopting it.
Yeah.
So, what are the trends that you're seeing from your clients' end?
It's gonna determine who stays in the lead versus who doesn't. It's going to determine the great companies from the good companies, right? And it's not about having the ability to analyze data. It's more about what you do once you've analyzed the data. And that's where the biggest gap today, because every company is going and investing in data analytics today, right? There are very few companies who figured out how they take that analysis and connect it back to strategy. Because if you're really true to analytics, then you will need to have a very flexible strategy that pretty much changes as new data comes in. Sure. Right? There are very few companies out there who are willing to do that today or have the conviction to go do that today. And I think that's the future. Today it's all about data analytics. I think what we have to move towards is the usage of that analytics. How do you mine the data that you have and turn it into strategy? As a company, I think the biggest transformation is the move of technology being the domain of the CIO to becoming the domain of the CEO. I think that's when all of this will start happening, because the CEO, as he defines the company strategy, has to use technology as a key pillar of that strategy. It's starting off, it's beginning to happen in a lot of places, still miles to go. But I think data analytics is going to become an integral part of strategy in pretty much all sectors.
India's produced a great, lot of technology specialists. But as the industry evolves, Debjani, and because you have recruited as much, and you've seen various generations of youngsters come in, my question to you is, where do youngsters need to work? Where is the gap that you see to be really in the forefront of this R&D-led, innovation-led revolution that is happening right now?
While in college, right?
College, yeah, or young professionals.
Young professionals. Problem solving. That's one, right? And that's where we are not very good. We are very good, we know all the theories. We know absolutely all the theories, way better than anyone else. But application of those theories to solve real life problems is where we struggle, in very simplistic terms. I think if there's one change that Indian education has to go through is equipping students, equipping young professionals to solve real problems, right? And I think for that, there has to be much more stronger collaboration between industry and academia to figure out how the industry trends are changing daily. So to be fair, it's difficult for institutes to keep up with that. But this is where industry and academia has to talk and has to agree on what are those trends and therefore what are those skills that are needed. If you look at the next few years horizon, and I hesitate to say more than maybe 2-3 years, we will pay a premium on people who come with really strong problem solving capabilities and proven problem solving capabilities, right? Who comes with strong analytical skills. These are becoming the capabilities that companies will start paying premium for, and of course are able to use technology to achieve a lot of this, right? I think that's really the biggest gap that we find in India.
So in that context, when UpGrad is doing something like this, what's your message for UpGrad, or what is your takeaway on how it can be the most effective?
Go fast, go bold, go big. This is needed. I mean, what they are doing is bridging that gap, right? Bridging that gap between, or they are literally becoming the bridge between industry and academics, and getting the two together to talk and create a curriculum or create a realistic curriculum that's sort of based in ground realities and build skill sets that will get students hired and make them useful once they're hired. Desperately needed. So congratulations for doing that, and I think just the only message is go as fast as you can.
How important is continuous learning also? Because we in India have a tendency to look at education as something that you do after your graduate, postgraduate, get into work, and then the work takes over. Especially with companies changing or technology changing so fast, how can the UpGrad platform and other platforms of online education be used for professionals who are ambitious and want to go ahead in life?
20 years at Intel and I'm still learning. And there's something new to learn every single day. For example, my recent pet peeve is Internet of Things. It's so much to learn there, what it does, etc. Right? You will never, if you really want to be successful, and success to me, again, is defined by the value you bring to the company and to your consumers. you will never fall short of finding things to learn. And continuous learning is tremendously important for success in an ever-changing environment that we are operating in, and I don't see that going away. I see that getting even more complex going forward. And I think this is where companies have to invest in training or upskilling employees, even the good employees. Sometimes we say upskilling is just a corrective process, right? It's not. It's a development process. For example, simple transitions we went through from selling to PC consumers or buyers to selling to phone buyers. Completely different skill sets that are required as a salesperson. Now we're moving to newer fields, selling solutions, selling Internet of Things, completely different skill sets. So how do you continue to upgrade the skills so that, and I think this is where it will help a lot if there is something that is practical. So it's not a theoretical course, but it's a practical course that is really based on ground realities, challenges, and prepares people for success in work life, so more problem solving based. And it's easily accessible. So it's difficult for us to say, okay, I'll free you up for 6 months to go attend a course somewhere, right? But if there is something available that you can do while you're working, so it's online and it's high quality, I think more and more companies will be encouraged in helping employees build those skill sets.
Last two questions. First is, for youngsters who are ambitious, want to be where you are, what would your advice to them be?
I'll give you the same advice that Sean gave me. Find an opportunity where you can be the best version of yourself, where the passion really clicks. You need to find something that you don't mind really devoting a large part of your life to, with no regrets, and you're able to give it everything that you have. There is absolutely no shortcut to hard work. I burn the midnight oil even today, prepping myself for meetings, interviews. I will not take even a single customer meeting for granted. I will make sure I'm 200% ready when I walk into that room and sit down with my customer. You can never take things for granted. You have to work hard, and there's never a position where everything will happen and I don't have to work hard for it. That position never comes. So you really have to work hard. You have to be resilient. Every career faces its ups and downs. There are moments where it's like, to hell with all of this, I'm going to chuck it all up and do something new. When that moment hits you, take a break, go and do something different and come back, but you have to be resilient. Mm-hmm. You have to have enough conviction in yourself and in what you do to know that this will work out. Create the value you bring, and be very, very confident about the value you bring. Most of us don't think through that one quite a bit. You have to know what's your value to the company. You have to know what's your value to your consumers, not just the company, and work on it. Keep improving on that one. And I think last but not the least is when you see opportunities, when you have a new idea, speak up. There's so many of us who don't, and I don't know why, because as I keep telling people, and I think Steve Jobs said it the best thing that happened to him was that he got fired from Apple, right, at one point in time. So getting fired doesn't kill anybody, right? But most of us don't speak up because we're scared to get fired. That at some point we need to stop worrying about it. This market is growing by leaps and bounds. Everyone will find, if you're good, you'll find an opportunity.
Absolutely. Last question, people keep talking about work-life balance, but I think work-life balance is also about opening your mind to the real influences outside work, okay? So if I'm going to ask you that, if you were to look within you and see what made you succeed, from what I've heard, it is really hard work, passion, the right mentors, the right opening of the mind to opportunities. What would your advice be? Because I think that's a huge lacuna as well in India. Kids are so bookish that they often don't see the world around them. So what would your advice there be?
See, I've worked hard on work-life integration. more than balance, but it's very personal. It's very, very personal. For me, there are some things which are sacred. For example, when I take my vacation, that's sacred. That's family time, right? And that's time for me to completely unwind. When there is something really important going on at work, that's sacred too, right? So you have to define those sort of boundaries, if you want to call it, or really, I think you have to define what matters to you. What really matters to you? What is that one thing in life that you really care about? What matters to you? And then set the right expectations, but communicate. Communicate to your bosses, communicate to your employees, communicate to your spouse or family, but communicate so people know, and if they have a disagreement, they can speak up. Don't surprise people, and build a support system. All of us need that support system, both at work and at home. Build that support system, and then stop being a victim. It's most of us start feeling that, to get into that guilt trap, and you'll never have the best of both worlds. You are not going to have it. You have to come to terms with that. Figure out what is the best you can have. How do you?
And it comes down to the fact, if you enjoy your work, it's never about balance. It's about really integration.
It's about integration. For me, at least personally, it's about integration. And I think I've reached a good place in life where I feel good about both. So hope that stays.
All the best for that, Debjani. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you.